Have you ever sat in a doctor's office and thought, I know something's wrong, but no one seems to be listening to me? Perhaps you've been told you're stressed. Maybe you've been offered antidepressants. Perhaps you've been told you're burnt out and that you're doing too much, or you're overthinking and that it's anxiety or depression, or perhaps the most frustrating one of all, well, you're just older. Meanwhile, inside yourself, you know something has changed. You don't feel like you. You don't think like you. You don't react the way you used to. You can't cope the way you once could. And despite desperately trying to hold everything together, you feel as though you're slowly falling apart. If this sounds familiar, please stay with me because today we're talking about why so many women are misdiagnosed during perimenopause, why so many suffer in silence for years, and why what you're experiencing may not be a mental health condition at all. It may be hormones, and more importantly, it may not be your fault. So, hello and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Susie and I'm a counsellor therapist, and on this channel we talk openly and honestly about emotional well-being, mental health, relationship, trauma, self-development and the realities of midlife. This video is part of a midlife hormone series where we're exploring the hidden and emotional and psychological impact of hormonal change, because whilst people often talk about hot flushes and night sweats, few people talk about the panic attacks, the rage, the brain fog, the anxiety and the depression, the loss of confidence, or the terrifying feeling that you're somehow losing yourself. And yet these are often symptoms that women tell me about the most. So let's explore why this happens. One of the most heartbreaking realities of perimenopause is that many women spend years searching for answers. Not weeks or months, but years. Many visit multiple healthcare professionals. Many are prescribed medication for anxiety. Some are prescribed medication for depression. Others are sent away with blood tests that come back normal. And because those tests are normal, they often are left believing maybe it really is just me. Maybe I'm not coping and maybe I'm just imagining it. And that self-doubt can be incredibly damaging, because when the outside world repeatedly tells you nothing is wrong, yet every part of you knows something has changed, you begin questioning your own reality. I know personally how this feels, and it's so hard to try and figure out what actually is wrong, when even your own doctor does not point out possibly the biggest and most common occurrence in midlife, which is perimenopause, or menopause for ladies. And as a therapist, I see this regularly. Women who have spent years gaslighting themselves, women who no longer trust their own instincts, women who know deep down something isn't right, but have become frightened about speaking up because they've been dismissed so many times. One of the biggest reasons women are misdiagnosed is because perimenopause doesn't look like the way most people think it does. Many people assume menopause begins when periods stop, but perimenopause can begin years earlier, sometimes 5, 8, or even 10 years before menopause. During this time, hormones don't simply decline. They fluctuate, sometimes dramatically. One day, estrogen can be relatively high, the next day it plummets. The body is trying to adapt to a hormonal landscape that is constantly shifting. And because estrogen receptors exist throughout the brain, those fluctuations can profoundly impact mood, cognition, memory, sleep, and emotional regulation. Research has increasingly demonstrated links between hormonal fluctuations and increased vulnerability to anxiety, depression, irritability, cognitive difficulties, and sleep disturbances during perimenopause. Yet despite this, many women enter healthcare settings describing emotional symptoms rather than hormonal symptoms. They say, I'm anxious, I'm exhausted, I can't think straight, I'm crying all the time, I feel overwhelmed, I don't feel like myself. And understandably, the conversation often becomes focused on mental health rather than hormonal change. One of the most common misdiagnoses is anxiety. Now, let's be clear, anxiety is real, anxiety disorders absolutely exist, but sometimes what appears to be anxiety is actually being fueled by hormonal fluctuation. Women often describe heart palpitations, racing thoughts, sudden panic, hypervigilance, feeling on the edge, difficulty relaxing, and a sense that something bad is about to happen. And what's frightening is that many women have never experienced anxiety before. They've spent decades feeling emotionally stable, and they're suddenly in the 40s and 50s and experience panic attacks for the first time. Imagine how terrifying this feels. You begin questioning everything: your health, your sanity, your future, your ability to function. And because nobody explains hormonal connection, you start believing you've somehow broken. For other women, the symptoms resemble depression, a loss of motivation, low mood, emotional numbness, lack of joy, withdrawal, hopelessness, or a sense of not recognizing themselves. Estrogen plays an important role in neurotransmitter systems, including serotonin and dopamine pathways that influence mood and well-being. When estrogen fluctuates significantly, emotional well-being can be affected. Again, this does not mean every woman experiencing depression is experiencing hormonal depression, but it does mean hormones should be part of the conversation. Unfortunately, many women receive treatment for symptoms without anyone investigating what may be contributing to them. And that can leave women feeling confused when treatment isn't fully helping, because the underlying driver has never been addressed. Of all the symptoms women describe to me, brain fog is often the one that causes the greatest fear. Women say, I walk into a room and I forget what I came in for. I lose words halfway through a sentence, and I can't remember names. I feel stupid and I'm making mistakes at work, and I feel like I've got dementia. These are intelligent, capable, successful women. Women who've spent decades managing careers, businesses, households, and families. Then suddenly their brain feels completely different, and because nobody warned them this could happen, many immediately assume the worst. The fear itself then creates more anxiety, more stress, more hypervigilance, which further impacts concentration, creating a vicious cycle. Something else that often gets missed is sleep. Sleep disruption during perimenopause can be profound. Women may struggle falling asleep, staying asleep, returning to sleep, or waking feeling exhausted despite being in bed all night. Now think about what chronic sleep deprivation does. It affects your mood, your memory, emotional regulation, stress tolerance, concentration, decision making, patience, resilience. Anyone deprived of sleep long enough can begin experiencing symptoms that resemble anxiety or depression, yet often the sleep issue itself isn't being addressed. Instead, attention remains focused on the emotional symptoms. So, why childhood wounds often reappear? As a therapist, this is something I find particularly fascinating. Perimenopause doesn't just affect hormones, it often brings unresolved emotional material to the surface. Many women in midlife carry decades of suppressed feelings, childhood wounds, attachment injuries, people pleasing patterns, perfectionism, unprocessed grief, trauma. For years, they have survived through being busy, being productive, being needed, being responsible, being everything to everyone. But hormonal changes can reduce our capacity to keep suppressing what has never truly been healed. It's almost as though the emotional filing cabinet we've spent years holding shut suddenly begins to open, and what emerges can feel overwhelming. Many women assume they're becoming emotionally unstable. What I often see is something very different. I see old wounds finally asking for attention. The greatest damage often isn't caused by the symptoms themselves. It's caused by dismissal. Being told, you're overreacting, you're emotional, everyone gets tired, you're just stressed, you're making too much of it. Every time this happens, women move further away from trusting themselves, and self-trust is everything. because healing begins when we learn to listen to our own experiences again. You know your body, you know your mind, and you know something feels different. And whilst nobody should self-diagnose, women deserve to have their concerns taken seriously. If nobody has told you this recently, let me say it now. You're not weak, failing, lazy, and you're not dramatic. You're not imagining this, and you're not going crazy, and you are certainly not alone. Millions of women around the world are navigating exactly the same experiences. The tragedy is that many women are doing so in silence because they believe they're the only one that is struggling. And the reality is quite the opposite. Many women are quietly wondering why they suddenly feel anxious, why they feel angry, why they feel disconnected and exhausted, why they feel unlike themselves, and many have no idea hormones could be involved. Perhaps the question isn't what's wrong with women. Perhaps the question is, why has society been so slow to understand what women experience? For decades, conversations around women's hormones have been minimised. Research has lagged behind, education has been limited. Many women enter perimenopause knowing almost nothing about what lies ahead, and that needs to change because knowledge creates empowerment. When women understand what's happening, fear begins to reduce, self-compassion begins to grow, and support becomes easier to access. If there's one thing I hope you take away from today's video, and it's this: trust yourself. If something feels different, pay attention. If you feel unheard, keep advocating yourself. If you feel lost, reach out for support. And if you've spent years believing you're broken, perhaps it's time you consider a different possibility. Maybe your body has been trying to communicate something important all along. Maybe you weren't failing. Maybe you were navigating one of the biggest biological transitions of your life without the information or support you deserved. And that is a very different story. If this video resonated with you, please let me know in the comments. I read everyone, and your story may help another woman realise she isn't alone. Please like, subscribe and share this video with any woman who may need to hear it. And remember, you do not have to navigate midlife alone. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video, which is the hidden link between perimenopause, trauma and your nervous system. Because for many women, hormonal changes don't just affect the body. They awaken old survival patterns that have been running quietly in the background for decades, and understanding that connection can be life-changing.